In today's episode of Future Secure, we're joined by Robert Busque, Regional Vice President for Asia Pacific at Verizon Business Group. Now, Robert leads one of the most critical front lines in cyber and digital transformation, working with governments and large enterprises across our region to strengthen resilience, reduce complexity, and respond when the worst happens. From Verizon's event SOC in Canberra to high assurance gateway services for remote access, Robert and his team are helping shape our digital infrastructure and national security connect in Australia and beyond. So today, some of the things we're going to explore is the geopolitical landscapes, the risks emerging from a weakening global trust, and how red tape and technological bottlenecks could undermine our ability to defend critical systems. We'll also hopefully dive into how the APAC region is responding, what every CEO and CISO and board member needs to be asking now to avoid becoming tomorrow's headline. So thank you for joining me as always, Jason, and thank you, Robert, for joining us. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So over to you, Jason, for the first question.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome, Rob. Yeah, and also the report came out recently from you guys as well, which is always something I think I look forward to, and a lot of people in the industry do, especially because it does focus on this region, and give us some good data points to look at as well. So maybe we can sort of cover a few of the things that came out of that if we get some time as well, Rob. But yeah, for the listeners and for myself, this is the first time I've met you, so good to meet you virtually this way. But no, obviously of the business and the company, as we said, from reports and other things. So just for the people listening who might be like myself prior to this, who don't know you that well, can you just give us a bit of a rundown on, either go back in time and come forward, or from where you are now and sort of go backwards, whichever way you're comfortable with, and just give us a bit of the story about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Jason and Tom. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Uh, I guess I have a little bit of an unconventional journey to the technology industry. I studied classical music and composition at university. In fact, I did
As
an
you do.
undergrad and a postgrad in both of those things. And at one point, my career trajectory was that I would become a professional musician and composer. Uh, that all changed post university. I moved over to London and started to sort of look up and out and think about the fact that there might be more to life and work and a career than playing music. And I'd always loved technology. My father was in the technology industry in defence. I grew up in one of those households where there was always whatever the latest or newest technology was. It was always somewhere in the house or being talked about. I'm a classic Star Wars kid as well, so anything to do with high tech was a big bonus for me. And at that time, it was the dot-com boom. It was the late '90s, and so I looked for opportunities to enter into the technology marketplace at that time, given it was such a booming industry. So I spent time in London, and then moved to Singapore, and spent a little bit of time in consulting there. And it was there that I joined Verizon in 2003. So I've been with the company for 23, 22 and some change years now, which feels like an enormous amount of time when I say it out loud. But actually, I tell you, it's flown by, because the rate of change and what's happened in the industry and what's happened in our business during that period is just so dynamic. In fact, I would argue it's the most dynamic industry in the most dynamic period of change post-war that we've seen anywhere in the world. And I would also argue that the Asia Pacific region has seen a faster rate of change and development than any other region in the world during that time as well. So if I reflect on, well, what has classical music and performance got to do with the technology industry, I think there are a couple of similarities and things that I took away as key platforms that I've carried through my entire career, and they're relevant very much to the cybersecurity part of the industry that I operate in today as well. The first is that as a musician or a performer, there's no second chance. You never rise to the occasion. You have to approach every opportunity to perform as being really defaulting to your level of preparedness. So it then comes to this idea of the discipline of practice and making sure that you put in the work and that you understand what the fundamentals to good performance are, and you learn the music and all of that type of thing, so that you feel very confident when it's showtime that you're going to be able to deliver. So that idea of never rising to the occasion, always defaulting to your level of preparedness is one. The second one really would be that, we used to have a saying in the music industry that amateurs practice till they get it right, professionals practice till they can't get it wrong. And that's very much a mindset and approach setting. So, particularly in business, it's a line I use a lot. When we talk about how we're preparing for particular activities or tasks with a client. For example, if we're working on a tabletop cyber response exercise for a client, or we're preparing for a large project or rollout of a new technology platform or service, bringing that mindset and approach is really important as well. And then since I've been at Verizon, I've been incredibly fortunate, spent a period of that time in Singapore, moved back to Australia. I would say for the 22 years that I've been with the company, easily 19 of those have been in roles focused primarily on the technology market here in the Asia Pacific region. A variety of different roles and functions, some specialist roles. I spent some time in sales operations and strategy, in the planning group as well, but all of that focused on exactly what's going on here in the Asia Pac region, save for a period of about 3 years where I ran international operations and strategy for the entirety of the international business. So that took in the Asia Pacific region, Latin America, as well as Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. A great experience. I spent a lot of time working in our European business during that time, which has a lot of similarities, but some huge differences as well. So a great opportunity to get under the skin of that business and understand how we can be successful in a very different market, but with very similar technology drivers. And then my current role, Jason, leading the Asia Pacific region, a little over 4 years, in itself has been a really interesting journey. I came into this particular role right at the start of the COVID response period. So that created a lot of challenges none of us had faced before, but really shone a light and amplified the importance of technology and the way that individuals and businesses use technology to not only communicate and transact internally, but also to face up to their customers. And we can talk about what that meant for a lot of our enterprise customers in the region. And then coming back to, a post-COVID world, it's described as the new normal, but I would just describe it as an environment of really significant accelerated change with a tailwind of change that's come from a lot of the COVID investment and changed business operations as well. So never a dull moment.
No, there's lots. I was
Always an
going to say there's
exciting
lots to unpack there, mate. It was the one thing you didn't mention was AI. That was the only thing that I was surprised it didn't get thrown into the mix there. But what number employee were you back then? If we're going back 22 years ago, what number were you then, and how big's the team now?
That's a good
you would have had a lot of
question.
growth over that time.
Yeah, we have had a lot of growth, and but the journey of Verizon maybe not described in employee numbers, but in the shape and size of the business. So I joined what was then WorldCom, or MCI, which was the refashioned business from WorldCom, and in the first 5 years, I joined the company. We relisted on a major stock exchange in the US, and then we were wholly acquired by Verizon about 3 years later. So we achieved sort of 2 or 3 things that in a 5-year period that most corporations might only experience in 20 or 25 years, if ever. So a really significant period of change there, Jason. And for us, we went from being a network-only business, primarily network and managed services business in Asia Pac as MCI. And then when the Verizon acquisition took place, we came into the fold of this much broader, deeper set of capabilities in wireless networking, next generation networking, IP backbone advancement, of course, cybersecurity, a really elevated capability in managed services as well. So I think about it in terms of maturity, a robust business in MCI moving into a really significant global technology provider in Verizon. So that was a really exciting change.
Yeah, it's massive.
I'd love to get you to kind of dive in and expand on what stands out and what's different about the cyber threats and the preparedness in the APAC region. I mean, right
Mm,
now we're seeing what's going on with Pakistan and India. There's a lot of cross-border cyber
mm,
attacks, let alone Taiwan, China, North Korea, South Korea.
mm.
Sri Lanka. These countries are in a state of kind of military flux a lot of the time. So, what is it like for you? How often does the phone ring? And how do you see the threats out there at the moment?
Yeah, really interesting question. It's an easy question to ask, but sometimes a really complex one to answer, Tom. Uh, but before I jump into that, maybe just heading back a second, because context is everything. If you think about where we've come from, when I came into the technology industry 20 odd years ago, let's say at 25 now, it was all about networking and connectivity. This is for enterprises and governments. So, how do I build robust networks that help me to use this new thing called the internet and the ability to transact digitally to accelerate my business and find new growth opportunities? And back then, it was this mantra of the slowest speed you'll ever settle for is the fastest you've ever experienced. So it was this concept in organizations, speed of connectivity and ultra low latency or driving latency down so that I could increase the exchange rate and the SCAR rate of data transfer. And then we moved from that sort of large trend setting to the idea of consumerization. So the launch of the iPhone and other smart devices when 4G connectivity became mainstream. And the question from both workers and employees, as well as consumers, was well, I have this really advanced technology experience in my private life. I now want that, or why can't I have that in my working life as well? So the consumerization of IT, particularly corporate IT, really drove a lot of change. And then we're now today in this, I wouldn't even describe it as digital transformation anymore. We're in a digital first universe when it comes to businesses. Digital enablement or investment in digital capability is part and parcel of any business case or any opportunity for growth or expansion in practically any business anywhere. So if you think about that as the context of where we're at, you're right to observe that businesses are struggling with not only that new technology or digital first framework, but they're also struggling with an environment that is shifting and changing far more rapidly than it has previously, both in the physical, geopolitical, as well as digital world. And the key question they're asking themselves is, well, what does this mean for me, and how do I better protect my business and insulate it from some of those external shocks? So when you look at the technology landscape broadly, there are a few areas that are clearly becoming hot topics or almost lightning rods for the discussion around broader disruption and change. One of those is around silicon chip production, clearly. The second one is around artificial intelligence platforms. There you go, Jason. So it's coming to the conversation.
Got it. Yeah.
And, AI, you can almost see this bifurcation of the market occurring where there's
Mm.
consumer AI platforms, but then there's now emerging a very different set of needs, primarily from a cyber and data perspective for corporations. And then the third one is submarine cables, so the global IP backbone and network. As important today as it was 20 years ago, arguably more so now because of the amount of data that we're having to move across those same networks. So those three technology, let's call them platforms or areas, are critical to the thinking from a insulation and risk perspective for most technology executives and leaders. Layer on top of that, then the cyber risk. And what am I thinking about primarily there? Well, I'm thinking still about how to best protect my assets, my corporation. But increasingly, in the data from the data breach investigation report shows us that what we call third party or sometimes supply chain risk is rapidly emerging. It has been for some years, but it's now really coming into focus as a critical area of protection and need for technology executives as well. So that's a key area that they're thinking about and how they grapple with that and how they start to talk with their partners in their ecosystem about better protections across the environment or across the value chain is just as important as talking about how I better protect my own organization.
Yeah, because Verizon, it's massive in the US, isn't it? I mean, Tommy and I were just there recently, and at RSA, and they're a massive player over there. Can you give us? I mean, you mentioned about Singapore, and you've mentioned about the region. What's the approach for this region for Verizon? Because what they're known for in the US, and then they're very
Mm.
well known there. But and being in the industry, we know them, and probably more so from a cyber sort of point of view than anything else. Really, that's sort of where they've sort of looked at the market, but as your role and where you sit, what are you sort of tasked with, and what are the sort of main drivers or sort of levers you pull to try and get Verizon known, or where are you trying to actually really get it seen?
Yeah, good question, Jason. I get this one a lot, actually. We're
Mm,
very focused in the markets that we seek to address internationally. So you're right in saying that in the US, a huge consumer brand, of course, in the wireless side, as well as our Fios assets and other things. Internationally, we focus 100% on enterprise and government customers. And our focus there is on networks, next generation networks, advanced managed services, and cybersecurity, very broadly. And so we're quite targeted in the sectors of the market that we are addressing and the solutions and platforms and services that we're bringing to those customers also. So when you think about the network and advanced managed services platforms, we still own and operate one of the largest global IP backbones. So in any given day, approximately 70% of the world's internet traffic transits the Verizon IP backbone somewhere. Um, the Security Operations Center, of which we actually have two in the Asia Pacific region that you mentioned at the start. Um, they're two of seven around the world, and we're very proud of the fact that we run a globally integrated SOC architecture, which means that our teams here information share, workload balance, and operate as a global SOC fabric with all of those other security operations centers
yeah, and I think
around
that's
the
why
world.
your
So we have
report,
a
Rob.
true.
Yeah, sorry, man, I was going to say, I think that's why your report's so thorough and so something worth looking forward to. I think for everyone in the industry is because of that spread and because of the size of your SOC,
Mm,
the inputs and the feeds that you get there, and in particular from this part, as you said, the two in region, but also adding those other five there. The report's very thorough because the thing is with a lot of reports, it can be very skinny on data, and it's not really
mm.
that many data points, and your report. I don't know if you've got any sort of stats to hand, for regionally, but I had a quick skim through it last week, and yeah, there was a famous number that sort of popped up there that I'm almost scared to say on this podcast after the Australian Cyber Network report we did recently, but. The numbers for ransomware in particular, I think it's sort of because of AI and everything. I think a lot of people sort of taken focus off it, but the ransomware numbers are still scary, aren't they? Like that you can see through that report.
They are. 51% of total breaches include
Mm,
some sort of ransomware. And so before I jump into some of those numbers, there are two things that I think make the report really unique. The first is that the global IP backbone that I referenced earlier is a core asset for us from a threat intel perspective. So we have one of the largest threat intel, non-government threat intel feeds in the world.
yeah.
Terabits of data come
Mm.
off that IP backbone about IP address locations, malicious threats, emerging activity and trends that feed directly into our analytics platforms in our SOC. So that's the first one. We have this raw data analysis that gives us incredible insight and power. The second thing about the report in particular, which I really think is a secret source of the report, is it's always been, of the 18 years that we've published it, it's always been positioned as a report that shows data, as you said, Jason, of what actually happened. It's not based on surveys, it's not based on supposition, but it's just the raw data. And the secret source to that is it's not just Verizon. There are some 70 plus other contributors, other technology providers, other security operators, many government organizations around the world, including here in the Asia Pacific region, including here in Australia. The AFP has been a contributor in the past. Cyber Victoria was this time, and likewise elsewhere around the region. And we produced a framework that allows pretty much anyone that does this sort of forensic investigation work to anonymize the information about the data breach that they've investigated it and feed it into the pool of information that we use to analyze. So we've created a real opportunity for the cyber community to gather and consolidate all of that information and give a really comprehensive readout. And I think that's a really powerful aspect of the report as well. But to your question, Jason, so, you know, ransomware continued to grow in both overall size, but also sophistication. So if you think about ransomware 1.0, or when it first started to emerge as a significant attack vector, the basic kill chain was I would come in, I would find some data, and then I would leave it resident in your system and I would encrypt it. And then I would tell you, Jason, please pay me some money so that I
And
will
I
decrypt that
would pay.
information
Yeah.
for you. The level of extortion has been taken to the next level now, which is not only do I encrypt that information in your system, but I also exfiltrate it beforehand. So the threat becomes across two vectors. You want to unlock the information that's in your systems that are crippling your business operations, but there's also the threat of that information being exposed. And we all know now, with the increase in policy settings and compliance and governance settings, that as soon as information is exposed, then that's a notifiable breach event in many jurisdictions. And that then creates a lot of flow-on repercussions for an organization around reporting, around privacy implications, what type of information was exfiltrated, and creates a lot of additional risk and a lot of additional potential work in the remediation phase. So the threat has increased both in terms of its overall volume, but also its sophistication as well. So every time we get better at responding to how these criminal groups or threat actors are operating, then they can very quickly change their attack vector as well and change their settings. So it's a very dynamic environment.
And what's it like for you, Rob? Because I understand, your phone rings when a large Verizon customer has actually been, involved in a potential breach. We know from some of the stories of people in similar roles that one of the first battles is to actually not get them to delete all the data, so you can actually start doing some forensics and to kind of find out who's in the system and what they've been doing, rather than that kind of panic response. So, what kind of experience and maturity are you finding when you're involved in the C-suite as this is playing out? And if you could share some of those stories, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, Tom, great question. The maturity is variable, but getting a lot better very quickly. So I would observe that the Australian government has made great strides forward in the last number of years with creating opportunities for industry, government, and service providers to come together to talk about joint response and planning and getting better organised, let's say, around how we actually respond to these events. At an individual organisation level, a conversation we have a lot with boards and C-level executives is well before, touch wood, well before a breach event occurs, it's all about what I said at the very start, going back to you defaulting to your level of preparedness. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your preparedness as a board to respond to a large-scale enterprise-wide cyber event? And if it's anything less than a 6 or a 7, then there's work to do there. So it's working with senior leaders on, simulation planning, tabletop exercises, and the like to help build that connective tissue and muscle within their organisation, so that they don't make some of the missteps, Tom, perhaps that you reflect on, like deleting data, which then stops us from being able to forensically investigate what the real impact was, and some other things, and really trialing and testing your response, because it hasn't been a case of if or when for a while. What senior leaders really need to be thinking about is the how. How will the most likely cyber event manifest in my industry or in my sector? And then how will we respond? And focusing on that how element and then testing and refining that is time very well spent for any senior leadership team. And it's really variable. If I think back to when we started to run tabletop exercises and simulations for senior executive groups, we had one large customer here in Australia where we gathered the senior leadership team in Brisbane for what was to be a day-long simulation exercise. And within the first hour and a half, the CEO of the organisation had essentially walked out of the room, left, and gotten on a plane and flown back to Melbourne because the stress and anxiety of where they were in terms of their preparedness was just too much for that individual. So that was a pretty visceral response, and I would argue one that you want to have in a simulation rather than in a real world setting. But then I would also reflect on there are many organizations now that are very well drilled and well prepared and have really well refined playbooks around, okay, if the phone does ring on a Tuesday morning at 8 a.m., here's our first hour response activities, here's our second, here's our third, and on it goes. And that really is becoming an area of focus for organizations, making sure that it's not a done in one approach. I've used in the Australian context a she'll be right methodology. So we sort of do it one time and test it, and then okay, well we've done that and it was sort of okay. So she'll be right if something really happens, we'll be able to manage through it. And that's really not the approach to take here. The approach to take here is to be really detailed and robust, but then also make sure there are people in the organisation that are tasked with constant refresh and upgrade and refinement of that plan as your environment changes, as your risk profile changes, as perhaps internal or external events within your organisation change the likelihood of an attack and the potential for one.
And bit of a lead in for you, Jason, and a question back to you, Rob. So, with enterprise organizations, is this tabletop enough? And Jason, you've got a great story about being involved in rolling out a real world experience, and I'll let you tell that. And then, Rob, I'd just love you to kind of reflect on whether more organizations need to be simulating this as close to reality as possible to test that human reaction as well as the system. So, over to you, Jason.
Yeah, I think, and I have mentioned this before, but exactly what you're saying, Rob, is that where we find it really works is if, there's very few people in the business actually know that this is happening to make it real. Because we had, with a previous business, run tabletops and done these simulations before. And the CISO's opinion, which turned out to be correct, was that they're sort of going through the motions and exactly that should be right. Right. We've got it. We sort of know how this sort of works and everything. So we did do, it was only the CISO and one other person knew that this was going to occur, but we did a full blown, completely offline, sort of cyber simulation with them to the point where we did do it, set it up where at 7:20, because this guy was very regimented, the CEO, coming down the driveway in the morning, press going up to him, saying what's happening, all that sort of stuff. He tripped up at that point. It started unraveling very quickly when it became real, sort of like that one you said with the CISO hopping on the plane and going away. Once this does become real for them, or it is seen to be a real situation, it unraveled really quickly. So he was quite polished and everything when it was like, here's the PR person or their marketing person giving him the script and they were reading it in the tabletop. It becomes real. He doesn't have the script in front of him. He's coming in, in his gym clothes at 7:20 in the morning and going, what's going on here, right? And to the point that went inside, and this is the thing I think we're most proud of in the story, was that because everything was offline, they had to go to a manual which was in a drawer somewhere, and it was actually a young girl in her early 20s who actually was previously, during COVID, you mentioned COVID before, but she was a critical care nurse, and she sort of switched careers into cybersecurity at that time when they had courses and things of that nature. And as cool as a cucumber, she just went over, opened the drawer. Everyone else was running around with hair on fire, and she's gone, we're supposed to just use this booklet, and she put it down, and they started going through the booklet and going stage by stage to work through it. But all this is on CCTV, so you could see everyone's reaction, and in the wash up of that, there was a lot more lessons learned, right? To the point of even they hadn't sort of considered, if we got to deal with a situation like this, who goes and buys food? to feed people? Do we have to get hotels nearby where we can have people sleep, because these are long days, people are going to be working 16, 18-hour shifts straight to try and get these things sorted out. So in your experience and from some of those, have you got some things and tips and tricks you'd suggest to people? Because we all should be doing this, right? This is, you do fire drills. The likelihood of having a fire in your building is very unlikely. But as you said before, the likelihood of a cyber attack, it's probably already happened. You don't know about it, or it's going to happen. So what are tips and tricks that you sort of learned that, in your experience, that work really well that we can sort of give to the
Yeah,
audience?
that's a great example, Jason, and I think what that illustrates is that coming together of the digital and physical world. So, and your responsiveness needs to consider not just your IT response, but also all the way through to things as you just observed. Like if we're pulling together a war room, we need to house these people for the period. Particularly if IT systems are down, we need to physically bring people together. How do we do that? And so on. So, your level of composure and response always comes back to your level of preparation.
Yeah, I think it goes to your music example. I think that was a great one off the top. I think there's some stuff that we can tie in, but I think those themes exactly as you talked about, I think most people, probably learn the basic chords on the guitar at best, and it
Hmm.
might only be G, C, and D, and maybe F to play their favorite song, right? Because they're usually the chords, made up to make these songs, right? So they just learn the absolute basics or get through just so they can get by and play a couple of tunes. But,
Mm.
we need a bit more than that, don't we? And I think your analogy off the top, and I think that ties into this, and those that Tom and I love these analogies, right? If we can bring in, and we love music, and anything you can sort of bring together to overlap,
Mm.
because we need more in cyber stories that sit outside cyber to give people that reference of a fire
Mm.
drill is just like the cyber drill, but how many cyber drills have you done, right? You
Mm.
learn your music. I love that analogy you did off the top. That people learn until they can play the song, but you want to do it until you can't
Mm.
make a mistake. Sort of thing. So we're
Professional practice till they can't get it wrong, and
can't get
that
it wrong. Yeah,
idea
love that.
is that
Mm,
you just learn it until it's pinpoint accurate.
mm,
I was going back many years ago. I was playing in the Queensland Performing Arts Centre. It's a concert hall there. It houses, I don't know, maybe 6,000 or 7,000 people, and we were supporting a particular artist. I was a woodwind specialist, and it was myself and two trumpet players and a trombone player sort of standing in the background playing along as part of the backing band. And one of the trumpet players passed out in the middle of the performance.
wow.
And I mean, it was quite shocking, of course, but
Mm,
quite literally the show had to go on. So the stage hands came in and sort of carried
dragged
him
you
off in the
off.
darkness behind the riser.
Yeah.
But the most important part of that story is the second trumpet player simply stepped over and started playing the lead trumpet lines immediately, because we had prepared for almost every eventuality, including having to cover each other's parts if something went wrong. And in that particular case, it did. But look, I think when it comes to cyber preparedness, there's a new dimension here as well. And that is that um, a snapshot in time isn't good enough either. So we're seeing some strong tooling around AI analytics and AI capabilities now that can give you a near real time view of your overall cyber risk posture. And that will be a significant area of growth and investment over the next 3 to 5 years, I would project. Certainly, Verizon is investing in building capability in that area for our customers. But if you think about the reality, I can do a a risk assessment of my security environment today. A month later, I've done a bunch of firewall burns, a bunch of changes, introduced a few new applications, spun up a bunch of new databases in the cloud, and all of a sudden my entire IT environment might have changed. And so, how do I know what that change looks like from point A to point B? And so, using intelligent tool sets and data ingestion to help to give me a real time flow of what that overall posture looks like is going to become an important tool for technology leaders as well as we go into the future. Hopefully, it will help them to make more informed decisions about investment and change that they make in the environment, to make sure that they're not diluting their overall cyber posture, but also hopefully helping to improve it with the changes that they make. And they can see it in the data or in the consolidation of log ingestion that platforms like this should be able to do. So I think that, when I think about the landscape and the environment, yeah, preparation is key, but also making sure that you've got a firm hand on the tiller as you go forward as well. So that idea of having someone that knows where the manual book is, making sure it's refreshed often, making sure that you get management and executive level views of your overall cyber posture and risk and how it's changing over time. The conversation no CIO or CISO wants to have is to walk into the board and say, well, we experienced a large breach event last month. And for the board to say, well, how can this happen? Because you told us 3 months ago that our cyber risk posture was, 90% plus, yet we've had a significant breach and it's impacted our business. That's a really difficult conversation to have without some data to help you to describe the changes that have occurred and why that risk posture has changed as well. So that's the other dimension that we think about a lot, and we talk a lot with customers across industry sectors about how better to manage and prepare for that type of outcome.
One thing that walking around the halls at RSA you see is there's an endless amount of platforms providing completely secure solutions and stuff like that. But how important is it to have those human skills and those human kind of analytics there? I remember hearing one or two conversations around how the defender's dilemma, actually, with the ability to have near real-time view of your entire systems through AI, has actually now become almost the attacker's dilemma. So you still need that kind of human skill set on top. So do you think we're doing enough there? And how do you see that when you go into organizations?
Yeah, great question. Oftentimes we'll go in and we see a vast array of tools, but none of the actual outcomes that they were hoping to achieve. So a lot of what Verizon does in the managed security space is helping customers to rationalize and functionalize all of the security tool sets that they have that might do one or two discrete things really well, Tom, but don't actually deliver the risk outcome or the protection outcome that they're looking for overall. So a lot of the work that we do in that space from a project perspective and a managed security perspective is helping customers to retool and redefine and replatform so they actually achieve those security outcomes. The second one around skills and analytics, well, I mean, it's all about context and it's all about correlation. And those two things are really difficult to recreate with AI tools to the same level of fidelity that we do with really well-trained, experienced analysts in the cyberspace today. So there's still absolutely a need for that. The big question is, with the amount of data, the amount of raw information, logs, and potential events that are now coming to analysts, how do you present that to them in a way that A, is digestible and makes sense, and B, gives them the ability to make informed decisions and correlate events across really disparate data sets. So a lot of it is about how we, bridge that operator technology or operator data divide so that we can not drown them in information and log sources and potential, events such that they become, they lose their impact or become inefficient in what they're actually supposed to be doing. There's a much broader conversation also to be had. It's been had in the industry for a number of years around the skill deficit that we have in cyber in Australia. That isn't going anywhere quickly. It's an area that industry, government, universities, and enterprises need to continue to work together on to find shorter on-ramps and more opportunities for people to reskill and retool and enter the cyber workforce, because we just have such a huge skill gap, not only in the short term, but if you forecast forward in the mid to long term as well.
Yeah, I think that came up, didn't it, Tom, in the Australian Cyber Network report, that Australia has got a lot to do, and then there is a lot of, as you say, Rob, cross-skilling or ways that we can look at other industries to try and bring people across. I mean, that example before of the critical care nurse coming into cybersecurity, and we've spoken on this show before about, like with GRC, getting people might have a legal or accounting background, see if we can get them to switch across, or sales and marketing, from the cultural awareness piece and everything like that.
Classical musicians.
Classical musicians, yeah. But we do need a broad church, and everyone seems to have come, and the more experience you've got in other areas, it can help, when you come into the industry as well, because you come with a fresh pair of eyes and you see things. And And we're giving kids these devices in their hands before they could even speak, which was never the case. Like you spoke about, since you've been at Verizon those 22 and a bit years, the iPhone, that came out, was it 2007, 2008, just say around that sort of time frame. I think it was just before the GFC or whatever. But that's look at what that's done. With regard to, you've got your camera, you've got your computer, you've got everything in that one device in your hand now. Which was never the case. Remember, it used to be an iPod, or going back to Tom and I. We used to listen to cassettes and vinyl records and stuff like that, right? The evolution, having them replaced with CDs and go through that transition. The transition's happening so quick these days. We got AI, we've got all these things now happening. It's exponentially getting quicker. Where do you see now, from a Verizon point of view, what are you hearing, or what are you guys working on to sort of try and sort of counter that, or get in front of that sort of next stage of AI development, when it truly does become artificial intelligence, and probably less of that sort of machine learning sort of model and going into true AI? What's sort of on the horizon for Verizon?
Yeah, so in the data breach investigation report, we talk about the impact that AI has on, particularly attack vectors, and there's clear opportunity for things like voice synthesis, and spear phishing attacks with digital twins and representations. There have been some high profile cases of Zoom calls using AI, versions of Rob asking someone to make a bank transfer and what have you. Um, and these are important emerging areas of attack to think about. But the data really tells us that the model isn't broken, so they're not trying to fix it. And what I mean by that is, if you look at things like social engineering attacks, in the Asia Pacific region, and other forms of fairly traditional, prompt injection in AI platforms, for instance, other forms of what I'd call lower cost operating models for organized crime gangs are working really effectively now in the same way that they worked 2 or 3 years ago. And we have to get out of this mindset that the cyber attacks are run by people with hoods sitting in a garage. These are organized corporate enterprises. They just happen to be criminal enterprises, who have no care for the law. And so they're thinking about their business model and their cost model. And if they have uh, um, uh, low cost strategies that have worked, that are proven, they're going to continue to use those because they know that they're going to get a payback. And that's candidly the reason why we've sort of seen ransomware continue to grow, because they know that that model has produced results for them. So rather than wholesale change that and move to, synthetic AI videos and other things, which are sort of higher risk, higher cost, um, we're going to continue to use the same attack vectors and strategies that we've used in the past because
Correct.
they're
Yeah.
successful.
And that's
If you
it.
look
And I
at what
think,
the report
yeah,
tells us,
sorry. Yeah, that's what I was going to say in your report too. And that it's the basics still, isn't it, Rob? Like on the report, it's
mm,
still saying it's still phishing. It's still issues with multi-factor. It's still weak
yep,
passwords. It's still,
mm,
unfortunately, we're still sitting here, from the last 10 years and really looking at Verizon reports. I know it's been 18 years, but if I went back since I've sort of been watching them the last sort of decade or so,
mm,
unfortunately, we still haven't fixed up the basics. It's still a strong password today. Is still a strong password. It's still not the case. Multi-factor
exactly,
authentication is still
yeah.
a point in. So you're right. There's still the basics that seem to be tripping us over, let alone what's coming on the horizon.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The basics and people.
Yep,
The
correct.
human
Human error.
element
Yep.
in breaches is as prevalent today as it was, Jason, 10 years ago. And but we do know there's a silver lining to this. We do know that proactive cybersecurity training of your employees does make a difference, and the report clearly talks about that. And your reporting rates are up from 5% to 21% for organisations that run formal programs. So you've got a much higher level of awareness. But I think you need to think about that human element as the low tide mark. And a low tide, lifts all boats, but we need that low tide mark to come up, because the stark reality is, in terms of protection, we need to be on our game and right 100% of the time. Criminals only need to be right 1% of the time. And so targeting individuals and targeting human behavior still is a very, very successful attack vector for them.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I think, and that's the thing. I remember, and I've said this before, I think on the show, but when Jono and I were starting Cyber Aware, which was an awareness training and phishing platform back in sort of 2016, 17, I remember saying this will be a 24, 36 month, and yeah, obviously the industry will catch up, and humans won't be such an issue, and all that sort of stuff. And the business is still running, unfortunately, fortunately, but unfortunately, as successful as ever because it is those common traits that are still not. And we look at the recent attacks there, multi-factor not being in place, and all these real basic stuff that, as you say, we want to raise that tide, and that's something that I think, besides what Verizon does, but as a whole of industry, we really need to get that embedded and go back into the schooling system and get it started earlier. So we're not trying to unlearn these bad habits in the workplace, which is often the case. A lot of the work we all do here is to try and educate the people that should have been like tying their shoes, putting a seatbelt on, or brushing their teeth done a lot earlier. This should be something we're talking about and trying to teach adults. I know there's a whole generation we spoke before that have sort of missed the boat. My mum is one of those, and we could talk about our parents' day. We're in a completely different generation, so they have to catch up in a different way. But for kids, it's almost criminal to a point that they are not actually being trained about this in school. I actually sat down yesterday with someone, and we were just talking about, he's a school teacher, and sort of said, oh, so you're in secondary school, you teach year 9 to 12. How's the cyber training going in there? We don't do it. It doesn't happen. That's
there's a lot of opportunities still for us to improve what we do all the way through the system. I think that's what that illustrates.
Yeah, and we just it just has to become second nature. We can't. It's said your report is a great report, but it's also sometimes saddening that we see that the attack vectors are still those basic points of entry that still trip us over.
Yeah.
And it's when you wind back in history, there's something about human biases that are keeping you stuck in this trap as well. I mean, I love to say culture eats strategy for breakfast, but Nigerian letter scams. I mean, back to the Midwest snake oil salesman. There's always people that are vulnerable, so tying them up is really important, and putting those protections in around. So, just to wrap this up, what is one message you give to that kind of C-suite and the leaders out there of those larger companies? That they should be kind of looking internally and making sure, is it around the rehearsals? Is it around that kind of stuff to make sure that they're prepared for, not if, but when?
Yeah, great final question, Tom. It's not if, it's not when, it's how. You need to be focusing on the how. What's the most likely attack event, and how will you respond? And feeding into that is all of those things around preparation, planning, practice, and preparedness. And then beyond that, it's thinking about not just your organization any longer. It's about your entire value chain and all of those third parties that digitally interact with you, and how you think about their security and its impact on your organization. They're the two key things that I would give to senior technology leaders, in fact, any leader today, to think about when it comes to being better prepared in the cybersecurity space.
Well, fantastic. There's some great tips. Thank you, Rob, so much for joining us. And listeners, you can find Rob on LinkedIn. Also, the 2025 Data Breach Investigations Report from Verizon is up online. It's really well worth the read. Get it into kind of yearly calendar. And thank you, Jason, as always, for joining us, my co-host.
Thanks, Tommy. And thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Tom.
Cheers.